Welcome, Mask Fest partygoers and other individuals and monsters. We're here with the legendary, undisputed king of latex masks, Mr. Don Post. What do you have to say to these guys about all the years making masks? How long have you been doing this stuff? How long have you been the king of masks?
Well, I don't know whether I'm the king of masks.
You're not the queen of masks, I think.
Probably not the queen, but I've sure been around it. I remember being around it at 5 years old, at least, in Los Angeles, when my dad first moved out there. We moved out there in 1948, and I can remember as far back as probably 1950 being around masks. And at 7 years old, I remember it being a family business. Both my parents were down there, and I was an only child, and I'd say, well, what can I do? I don't have anything to do. And they say, well, you can paint silver bolts on the frames. So I've been around it quite a while.
That's like a childhood dream job, painting silver bolts on frames. You know what? If I just came into your house off the street to fix your sink or burglarize your home, would I have any idea what you do for a living? Or does it look pretty normal in there?
It's probably pretty normal. I do have some pictures on the wall. I do have a bust of my dad and some other things that are sprinkled around, but you wouldn't know. It's like people ask me, well, what do you do on Halloween? Well, by then, I'm pretty exhausted.
So you don't have a house that's like full of enough weird stuff that you're going to come downstairs and find a dead burglar on the floor some morning who shined his flashlight at the wrong thing.
No, I doubt that. I used to have a full set of the Star Wars figures, but now my kids have those, so...
Darn those kids.
Yeah, so
spoil the fun. Yeah.
They've got those things, and my house, my private life looks fairly normal.
You know, one thing I always wanted to hear you say something about, I think most of the people in attendance here, most of the viewers know that latex masks start out as a clay sculpture, and then a plaster negative is made. It's the mold, and then the latex is run in the mold, and that's how it's made. In the case of the vinyl masks, I understand the procedure is very different. Talk us through the process a little bit of how vinyl masks differ.
Well, it's really not that different. The process, what we would call the process of mask making, is called slip casting. And slip casting has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. Pottery has been made that way, and it's been made that way for thousands of years. And the only difference, really, technically, is that we're using latex with a clay filler in it rather than a clay slip. So we're using a latex slip material. Now for PVC masks, PVC is a oil-based material, and we do slip cast it. But what we do is, with latex, you're requiring the mold to absorb moisture and cause a thickness to build up on the inside of the mold. With a PVC material, with a vinyl material, you're requiring, the mold has to be heated, and you're actually baking the material onto the side of the mold. So you fill the mold the same way that you would, but the mold would then be heated to 500 degrees, and it's usually done so in a salt or oil bath. So you have 500-degree oil in a bath, and you submerge the outside of a metal mold And the metal mold is electroplated with, it's usually copper with a nickel fill. The first layer would be nickel, and then the mold is mainly copper, and then the mold is heated up in this tank to 500 degrees with material in it, and then the material is slushed out, same way that you would do with in a latex slip casting. And then the mold is put back into this oil to remain heating and baking that layer of material on the inside of the mold. And then the mold is taken and put into a bath of water to cool it off. And the PVC is then taken out of the mold, is pulled out of the mold. So you can turn around, you can turn a mold around in like minutes, 7 or 8 minutes. And where with a latex casting, you're looking at a much longer period of time.
You're under arrest.
I know.
Uh-oh.
You finally caught up with
Handcuffs here, they're put on with tight. I don't want to do that.
Well, you finally caught up with me.
It's because you're telling people to do 500-degree baths and they can get confused.
Exactly.
Don't
But it's
bath.
really that they're both a slip casting process. There's other ways that you can do PVC, like rotational casting. But usually with a mask, it's slip cast. That's the way that we've always made the masks. We have a guy in Glendale named Torrey Smith who would do the castings for us, and he also did things. He also did castings at the time for Doc Johnson, who makes a different kind of PVC product, and so he was doing the castings at the time when we originally did those PVC masks. They were done in Glendale for us, and we'd get them over, and the PVC gets a little bit stiff, so we heat it up, we put it in a tumble dryer and warm them up, get them back into shape, and then paint them.
You must get interesting looks from people down at the laundromat.
Well, we would if we went to a laundromat.
Oh.
But I mean, at one time I owned 7 laundromat dryers. I was driving down the street and I saw them in somebody's backyard. And I said, "You want to sell those?" So they sold me the dryers, and I used them in California, and I think now they're somewhere in Malaysia, probably in the garbage dump in Malaysia. But
That was
that's
kind of a sad story, wasn't it?
Which?
Kind of a sad ending for the dryer.
For the dryers.
Aw.
Yeah. At least they got around a little bit.
What kind of paint did you find worked best on the vinyl, the PVC, the non-latex masks?
Well, originally, I mean, we really didn't know, I really didn't know anything when I started full-time. I was 23 years old. And what was being used at the time was a latex acrylic paint, which was pretty flexible and stick to those masks pretty well. Later on, we found out that there were actual lacquer type paints that you can get that are specifically for PVC, and I've used those also. But a lot of the, for instance, 800 line masks, which would be the clay fill latex masks, and the PVC masks, they were painted with vinyl acrylic paint.
I'm sure you've gotten this about 6 bazillion times, but this is going to be 6 bazillion and one. Any favorite masks from over the years? Any that you really especially liked them or related to them or kept one for yourself?
Frankenstein 2000.
With the bubble on top.
Yeah, I really like that mask. Bill here sculpted.
I was just going to say, I wonder who sculpted that mask. The fellow they didn't like enough to give a microphone to. You were kind enough to share yours with him. You know what? This is the mask discussion.
Okay.
We're not allowed to talk about movies.
I wouldn't dream of it. What movies? What are you talking
Just general purpose.
I see.
What are some of the masks you sculpted for Don Post Studios back in the day?
Well, gosh, it was actually quite a lot of what the way it was divided up really was during that period. I was sort of responsible for what stuff actually went out the door.
I think when I was a kid, I think I had a bedroom full of sculptures of yours. I didn't know that at the time. But
Well, what happened was I wound up sculpting about half of them, and Bob Short, the effects guy now, he did about the other half, and there was a few other people that Dave Ayers, who worked for us briefly, did a few, and some. And of course, when I got there in 1973, 74, somewhere around there, and of course, there was still a lot of stuff left over from Pat Newman, and she had sculpted a lot of the stuff. And really what happened was when I got involved, I saw the molds were starting to wear out, and I think, I don't know if it was the Don Jr. or Don Sr. asked me to resculpt. I think it was no, it wasn't the creature, it was the mutant. No, I think that was the first one I sculpted, did a resculpt.
the smaller size one?
Right.
Not the big,
Yeah,
huge,
not the
but
big,
like normal head size,
Right,
wearable.
Right, and because the old mold, they didn't have a master that was any good anymore, and that mold, the mold they had was starting to get like really blobby looking, so it was just something that I did, and then it started selling well, and I think Don Jr. asked me to redo the creature, and I redid that one, and then
The legendary Bill Malone creature.
and then I just sort of went on from
To this day in the mask collecting world, that's referred to as the Bill Malone creature.
Yeah, well, I've got
Not because of physical resemblance, just everybody
Could
knows
be.
that. Is it
Yeah.
version A or is it the Bill Malone creature? That's one of the classics that everybody had to own.
But just briefly, what happened with the reason why the Frankenstein 2000 was what I call it. I think it was McCabe's 2001. Why that
Typo.
Yeah, it was actually. Why that came into being was at some point, I think it was probably in the mid-70s, it became aware to me, and I think to Don as well, that Universal was planning on at some point pulling the license from us. And if you look at the side of the band in those days, it was all like Universal characters, one right after another. And
Like
Don,
that guy.
Yeah, and Don and I talked and said, look, there's a good chance that if they pull the plug, we're going to be sitting high and dry, so we better come up with some original characters, which is what we started to do, and started this designing characters. And I did the Frankenstein 2000, and
Drop some more names.
the Hydroloid.
Hydroloid.
This was kind of interesting. The Old Vampire, which of course is Barnabas Collins. And the story behind that, which people think we knocked it off, which was actually not the case. What happened was I actually knew Dan Curtis. I called him up because I'd worked on one of his shows, and then called him up and said, Dan, I really want to get the rights to House of Dark Shadows, the Old Vampire. And he goes, I don't care about that. Just go away. I said, well, Dan, I want to make these. No, just get out of here. Go away. Go away, make it. Don't tell me about it.
He basically told you kids get off my lawn.
Yeah, basically, they just didn't want to know about it, because there wasn't enough money for them to even think about. So we just went ahead and did call it the Old Vampire.
They thought.
Yeah. So exactly.
Yeah, now thought of as a classic mask.
That was actually one of my favorite sculptures. And the first batch of those looked pretty cool.
Did you sculpt the later one too?
No, I think the later one was probably a resculpt.
Actually, there were a couple of resculpts over the years. There were two that looked real similar, and then later on it had like a little different wrinkle pattern than that.
Yeah, no, I just did the first one.
Just the first
Yeah,
one.
And then I did also the Chris Lee Dracula, the first one of that, and Eric, the vampire, or not the vampire, Eric.
Phantom of the Opera
Phantom of the
type
Opera.
guy. One of my favorites, I still have mine that I had when I was a kid, Eric, the one that looks like one bad eye.
And then there was the demon, which that's actually from a classical painting that I found. I had a book of art, and the demon is actually right out of one of those paintings. It's almost line for line.
I have a charming and tasteful romantic story about the Eric mask. Again, the same one that I have. Here's one of the reasons I still have it after all these years. It represents the first time Laura, my wife, who was my best friend's sister way back then, you know. It's the first time she ever kissed me. I was wearing that Eric mask in a haunted house. My birthday is Halloween. And she found that out, and I barely knew her. She was my friend's sister. And she grabbed me in the maze at some point, and she's like, here's your birthday kiss. And like stuck her tongue into the Eric mask's rotted, ugly
You know,
figure.
don't you love that in a woman? I mean, come on.
Is that a great? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
So it's like at that point you knew she's cool.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
But somebody has asked me, do you want to sell your old Post Eric? I'm trying to complete that series. I'm like, I can't part with that one. It's like a burned up, ugly, dead guy with sentimental value. So,
And, you know, then one of the other ones was like the Death Cyborg and stuff, which was, by the way, pre-Star Wars. And
did you just get quieter? Or am I?
I don't. Okay, sorry. Was the Death Cyborg, which was pre-Star Wars, and
It was pre-Darth Vader, wasn't it?
It was, and it started selling really well after Star Wars came out because we didn't have the Star Wars masks ready yet.
Mhm.
And people saw that, oh, it's like Darth Vader, we can buy that one.
But you didn't mean it to look like Darth Vader.
Not at all. In fact, you know what we used to do when I used to shoot all the photographs for the catalog, and Bob Short did all the layout for the catalog, the physical layouts. And what we try to do before we shot the pictures is the ones that we created ourselves. We thought, well, they should have their own story. So we tried to make up a story with each one, you know. And the Death Cyborg was about a robot from the future who's come into this time to to kill somebody to
She
change.
kind of came up with the original Terminator.
And that was our storyline for it.
You know,
It was hilarious.
I actually got a Death Cyborg that every year my parents took me to the Disney theme parks in the summer, and that was always a big thing that I looked forward to, was that I got Don Post masks as souvenirs. There used to be Merlin's Magic Shop. And I had a Death Cyborg as a kid, and I remember everybody saying, oh, that's a rip-off of Darth Vader, and I was sure it came first.
No, it was out first.
Because I had it like a year before I heard of Darth Vader.
Well, yeah, what happened with that is we introduced that mask the year before and there were some sales on it. It was a decent selling mask, but the next year when Star Wars came out, that mask also sold. We could sell as many as we could make on that mask. And at one point, Lucasfilm called me and said, this cyborg mask, can you send one over to us? Okay. So we send one over, and we get a call back, and they said, when did you start making this mask?
I'll bet.
And we said, well, we started making that mask about 18 months ago. They said, oh, okay, fine.
And you
But
can
they
show
were
them the
concerned
catalog.
that, you know, we were ripping them off, I think.
Now, let me just say one thing. I just wanted to say one thing about Don is, you know, the reason that those things even came into being was the fact that Don created an atmosphere that was sort of very friendly to creativity. I mean, he, you know, we were kind of like, all three of us, Don and myself and Bob Short, we were kind of like, we were the Willy Wonka and we were living in the Jack's Chocolate Factory. But I mean, that really came from Don. I mean, he, you know, just kind of had a real loose, you know, quality about how we could work and do that stuff.
So when you were working there, your imagination and your
Yeah, we were
creativity
pretty much unfettered.
they were cultivated rather than stifled.
Right, and probably unfettered, maybe even too much at sometimes.
There was a museum somewhere, it was either Myrtle Beach or Niagara Falls, I'm not sure because I'm old and confused, where, again, this was when I was a kid and traveled with my parents. I saw a Darth Vader figure in it was either Castle Dracula or House of Frankenstein, you know, they had a Darth Vader and somebody had broken the face piece. It was a Don Post mask, and they had used the Death Cyborg and jammed the Darth Vader helmet onto it. And I'm sure I was like the only kid for, you know, most of the time there who was geeky enough to recognize, that's not Darth Vader's face, that's Death Cyborg, you guys have got it wrong.
The difference between Bob Short, Bill Malone, those here, and I, is, the difference between us is they really grew up as fans, like you guys did. I grew up right in the mix. I mean, everything that I saw was normal to me. It was part of the family life. When my dad did the original Body Snatchers, all the effects from that, the story of what was going on, and come home every night. Now, here I am, a little 7 or 8-year-old kid, and I'm hearing all about this, and it just seemed like, you know, this kind of thing went on in everybody's house everywhere, and it didn't seem unique to me at all. So I really kind of had a different view. I think really where one of my really strong talents is recognizing the ability of other people. I recognize both the enthusiasm and talent of Bill Malone and also of Bob Short. And I think that's really where I feel comfortable with saying that that was my contribution. My contribution, when you've got people like that, is to say, just go for it. And they always did. Now, if there was something that I specifically asked, for instance, Bill to do, he was a little less enthusiastic about those particular items than he was about the items that were coming out of his gut. And
I've never seen anyone sculpt like that.
well, yeah, you do, actually. You do, because with the very little bit of sculpting I've done, I realize that it comes right out from underneath your rib cage.
And now you have
It's a lot of work.
Now you have to tell everybody a little bit about what sculpting have you done.
Well, I'd rather not say. I did.
Will we have to censor the DVD?
No, you're going to have to ask me, because I've done a couple things, but you know, they're really not the heart and soul of what Don Post Studios is. The heart and soul is what, in my era, and the things that were developed in my era, is the people that I've been able to work with, the really good artists, the way I've been able to maybe inspire them a little bit and give them some direction to go in, but then let them really create things the way that they see them. Later on, I realized I was reading a book by Lee Iacocca, the car guy who worked with Chrysler, with Ford, developed the Mustang. And what he said is that you have 3 options to get something done. The first option is to get somebody to do it the way that you want it done. The second option is to get somebody to do it the way that they would do it. And the third option is to do it yourself. I've always been interested in the second option. I've always tried to get the most out of everyone that I could.
So you were kind of the Roger Corman of masks, like encouraging the up and coming, but the guy who was in charge of the facility.
Either that or Roger Gorman, or you know, the Gore.
Roger Gorman?
Yeah, okay. Well, I guess I picked the right thing to do.
Yeah.
I should stay out of comedy.
And stick with
Yeah.
masks.
Right.
Just this, you may not have the slightest idea, but I'm going to throw it out there, so you should probably duck. How many different characters have been produced at Don Post Studios over the years?
Well, you probably know better than me.
But you know, there's so, I'm taking into account all the little ones and the non-movie ones. And
Well,
any idea at all?
it would be well into the hundreds, and then also there's, if you think of a lot of the things that are great cover-up or paper magic, there's even more. And I know there's been years when we've done 150 different things, so it's got to be a big number.
So it's don't listen to him, it's in the millions.
And I just want to say there was also probably, there's a lot of characters you may even not be aware of that we literally sold 2s and 3s of. You know, we made the character, we put it out, and either the response wasn't good or they were just unreasonable to produce or whatever the case might be. Like, most people don't even know we made a Colossus of New York. You know, which
Believe it or not, I owned one.
okay, that's extremely rare, but there's probably 5 of those ever made. You know,
And
so.
you sculpted it, did you not?
I did sculpt it, and there was a few other we made next to the night turkey, which was a
Night Turkey.
Yeah.
What was the story behind that? I'm
Well,
sure
actually,
you're familiar with Blood Freak.
well. Actually, if you go on YouTube, it's actually posted right now on YouTube. Night turkey. If you look it up.
Night Turkey.
Yeah, it was a 1-hour spin-off. It was like the first thing I ever did directing, and it was a 1-hour takeoff on Night Stalker, about a giant turkey that attacks people outside of Colonel Sanders.
And gobbles them up, I suppose.
Yeah, and he's a weird turkey. He can only be destroyed by driving a frozen chicken into his heart on Thanksgiving Eve. So anyway, if you look
The 3D remake will be coming out next week.
so, but actually, if you get a chance to look at it, it's really funny, and it's got Rick Baker in it.
How long of a feature?
It's an hour long.
It's an hour?
Yeah, and it's almost line for line Night Stalker, but it's got some funny stuff. Bob Burns plays the gorilla in it.
Tracy the Gorilla?
It's Robbie the Robot's in it looking for MGM. He's lost and he can't find MGM. And, and then Rick Baker also made the Night Turkey. Now, I want to say something because Rick probably would be really upset about this if I don't say this. We had him make it intentionally bad. So it's got the big zipper up the back, and we wanted it to look like the worst possible thing you could see. And that's what he did. He did it brilliantly, and he actually plays a part in the film. Anyway, so
What year would that have been?
This was about 1973, 74. So we actually produced it, and actually there's a couple shots that were taken in the old Don Post Studios, even before Milford, where we used as the editor's office. It was actually Don Post Senior's office. And I think we broke his typewriter, who I think accidentally he was mad about it. Anyway, so
You have to
but night turkeys,
self-regard.
but we actually made a night turkey mask for a very short period of time.
You know, I have somewhere an old Don Post flyer with Night Turkey on it, and I never understood that.
Now you know the story.
What is that thing? Anything, our character?
We also produced a Disney Captain Nemo helmet, which,
Captain Nemo helmet
yeah,
from
20,000 Leagues.
2000 Leagues?
From the Disney 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, we did a prototype of that, which I believe Bob Burns may still have. And if we didn't do it only because Disney didn't want to give us the license. For some reason, they've been very reticent to do anything with 20,000 Leagues for some reason. I never knew understood what that was about, but they didn't.
I don't think I've even seen that. Was it latex?
It was what do you call it? It's a mannequin rubber. It was that the hard rubber, the stiff. Yeah, and it would come out kind of punky, and you let it sit, and it would get hard and stuff. And because it's made out of that, I think it still exists today. I think Bob Burns has it, but that's a fairly rare item. We also were going to make a 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea plaque, which was a vacuum form thing for you to paint, and I have pictures of that somewhere.
And that would have been around when?
That would have been,
I'm guessing probably mid-70s, probably 75 or 76.
I'm going to just make them pass the mic back and forth as awkwardly as possible.
Well, we had fun.
It sounds like it.
We did.
And you're probably tired, you're probably sick to death of this topic, but people I run into out here are like, are you talking to Don Poe? Yeah, I interviewed him. Ask him about the history of Michael Myers.
Well, it was sculpted by
Nobody would know?
Yes, I sculpted the Michael Myers mask. It was, you know what?
No, we have you on video saying that now.
Yeah, I know. No, actually, what happened was this actually goes along with what we were saying earlier, that we were under the impression that Universal was going to pull our license, which they did ultimately. And so we decided to get other licenses for other films. And one of them was Star Trek. And our interest was mainly in making the Goran and the Salt Vampire. And we really had very little interest in Captain Kirk, and because we thought, who's going to wear a Captain Kirk?
You would think the monsters would be more popular.
Yeah, so we weren't really that interested, but the deal was we had to produce X amount of each character. So
the studio demanded a Captain Kirk.
Yes. So we got a casting. Don may have a different recollection. My understanding was it came from Paramount. They said it was Bob Don, a casting of William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy, and I made clay presses out of them, made molds out of clay presses, and then resculpted it slightly just to make it larger.
So you could fit it over your
head.
head.
Yeah, because what you need to know is you can't really take a life cast of somebody and make a mask out of it because they're already human sized, and if you put it on, it'd be all stretched out, or it would look, pretty bad. So I resculpted the Bill Shatner mask and made it a little bit larger, and that was and then later on, I remember, a year, maybe so later, John Carpenter and 2 or 3 other people came in and asked us to paint one white, which we did, sprayed the hair black, which we did. And at the time I asked him to make 2 copies because I wanted one for myself. I said, I don't know what he's doing, but it sounds like fun. So I kept one for myself, and somebody borrowed it a long time ago, whose name will go unknown, but his initials are down post, and I haven't seen it since. And that's the story.
Yeah, that one got swallowed up in a lawsuit, and really, it's a matter of a lot of money. And
I wonder how many of those were produced at your studio. How many? Captain Kirk.
The Kirks?
Original edition Captain Kirk.
Oh, 48, 144, something like that. Really? And it was not, because if somebody wants to be Captain Kirk or Spock, they want to be themselves as Captain Kirk or Spock. They don't want to put a mask on necessarily.
I think that's still true. Monsters are more popular.
Yeah, it's got to be, the mask has to be radically different from, what you could portray yourself, with a pair of pointy ears or something. And by the way, Leonard Nimoy's eyes are so close together, it's just unbelievable. Isn't that true? I remember it.
I want you sink in your own.
Yeah, okay, but he really has a narrow nose, and
he's got a very long face.
Yeah, very long, narrow face.
So you had to design something with gigantic eye holes so that people could actually see out of it.
But anyway, that mask, it's become a monster, and a lot of the issues could have been settled except for the fact that there's so much money involved, that there's lots of greed involved, and everybody tried to get in on it. And it really, in a lot of ways, it's damaged its own, it's interrupted its own sanctity of being just a particular character by all of the fighting that's gone on over that. But that's a matter of that there's a lot of money involved, and I believe that I have a right to do what I've done, and other people obviously believe they have a right to do what they've done. And that's, I guess, the shame of what greed can bring to the table, you know.
When they first came to you and hey, spray one of those white and put black stuff in the hair, did that make any sense at all? Did you even?
Well, yeah,
It just sounded bizarre.
it seemed like a pretty cool thing, you know. And if I was really, I mean, there's so many things that could have been done at the time, and one of them is I wish I would have made a couple dozen of those Captain Kirk masks for myself, put them away. But there's so many different things that could have been done. And I think it's a good idea for movie makers to think in advance and say, okay, if I'm going to make this movie, I'm going to make my own character, I'm going to copyright it, so that it belongs to me. But that wasn't done.
I just want to say, I doubt that would happen today, because I think that everyone's so hip to licensing. And you got to remember, this was also made just before Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
So Star Wars, before Star Wars, the studios had no idea of merchandising or licensing or any of that. That was just like something, usually if some old guy in an office did, they just did it just to keep people quiet.
And now all the movies have product tie-in.
Right. So at the time, that's all there was. So I think people, on behalf of Carpenter, those guys, I don't think they were thinking that this would ever become anything that you could think about, or any of those people did. And, it wasn't really until Star Wars that the whole licensing thing became an issue, so.
And Myers was the mask that would not die.
Yeah, Michael Myers.
I
always confuse him with the comedian Michael Myers.
I know, somebody's like, oh, Mike Myers. That's a little too informal.
Well, yeah,
Michael Myers.
that's true. What Bill says is absolutely true. I mean, I don't think it would happen today because I think characters are today, and I mean, even if you look at some of the Star Wars characters, they were developed completely explicitly because they knew they'd be able to license them.
Mm-hmm.
So,
not to mention Ewoks or anything, right?
exactly. Well, yeah. And so, things have changed. Things have evolved in that business, and I don't think that's a Michael Myers situation is going to happen again. I mean, they've tried to change the character. In one of the early movies, they tried to change the look of a whole character, and that didn't work for him.
The Part 5, it has no William Shatneriness in it.
Exactly.
It has none of that chewy William Shatner goodness. Part 5 has.
The only thing that I thought at the time, I remember seeing the movie, I thought, they missed a bet that at the end when he takes his mask off, they should have Bill Shatner be the guy.
I'm sure you've seen the interviews with him where he talks about taking his kids trick-or-treating, wearing a shaved mask, and
that's hilarious.
over his own face, and nobody knows it's him. And he could take it off, and people are like, "What?"
Yeah, and I must say, with Bill Shatner, I mean, that guy, if you look at his whole career and everything, and that he didn't make a big deal out of that mask being used in that movie, I mean, this guy is a real performer. He understands that even though he didn't get anything off that movie, that, I mean, it was a real enhancement for himself. And I think he's the greatest.
I have never met him, but he seems like he would be just the life of the party. He seems like a ton of fun because he's so into making fun of his own image and having fun with his popularity. And he seems like a great guy.
Right. Well, for a while we did make a licensed William Shatner mask. It wasn't supposed to be Kirk. It wasn't supposed to be anything. It was just William Shatner.
What year was that?
That would be about 99.
I know I have the catalog with him. I'm just testing your memory.
Right.
Was that a big seller?
No,
No?
no, you think people would pick it up just so they could make their own?
Just so they could take it home and
Yeah.
spray it white?
Yeah, exactly.
I would have thought that would be a huge hit. Was that only out for 1 year?
I think one or two.
1 or 2? Yeah, you know, you guys basically started mask collecting. There wouldn't be any of this HMA and Mask Fest and all that if it wasn't for, and people come to me a lot with, do you know where I can get an old such and such mask and this and that? And a lot of times it's movie, it's Universal, or it's Star Wars or Star Trek or whatever shape. But, you know, a lot of times, too, it's Don Post Studios masks from the 70s, like you were talking about, the generic, you know, non-movie looking like Frankenstein 2000, Eric, B. Garrett Theta, Caridian Alien, the alien with the 3 little onions growing in his face, those guys. Is there ever a chance of a, you know, high-end collector reissue of that stuff? I know it's not going to be popular in the way that, oh, Freddie, because everybody knows who Freddie is, but a lot of collectors just love that stuff because it's from the era in which they grew up.
That's an interesting idea.
Is that
So
a
I'll take
possibility?
that into consideration. But I'd like to ask Bill where the name B. Garrett Theta came from.
Where did that name come from?
Okay, well, here's the story. I had left a note on my desk that said, call Bonnie Garrett, Theta Television, TV. And Bob Short, who was in charge of doing the catalog, as I said, just for some reason got it in his head that was the name of the character, because it was on my desk, and pulled it off and said, oh, B. Garrett Theta, okay.
It's a great sounding name. It's got a classy kind of ring.
Yeah, so that's the
Well,
story.
see, that blows my theory because I thought it was somebody found a grocery shopping list made by someone with very poor penmanship, and it said beans, carrots, potatoes. But that's not the case.
No, that's not the case.
Well, I think we're just about out of time here because they
Thank you.
John,